this week, I'm going to notice it. Okay, great. There. Technology finally succumbs to a lead pipe and a lot of swearing at it. But I was polite, so I didn't say the swearing out loud. Does anybody in here swear at their computer? Is there anyone who doesn't swear at their computer? That's probably a more honest question. Are you raising your hand? Okay, so there's one person who doesn't swear at their computer. I'm impressed. I'll do office hours tomorrow from 2 to 3, and again next Monday. And I still haven't heard from the TAs, so I don't know what's going on with them. So thank you for the check-in. I took the check-in, did some analysis on it, and was able to identify 2 pain points that came out. I mean, in general, the feedback was positive, but I'm trying to address the things that the people who are honest actually said. And so I added an onboarding document to Canvas, which, you know, for those of you who've already been here, you're probably like going, well, that's too late. For the people who just got off the wait list, you get to benefit from that. The other thing that there was a negative comment that unfortunately I can't do much about is this annoying AWS credit thing, which I still haven't heard anything about. And I have no control over. Believe me, if I did, I'd say, yeah, give you guys $1 million worth of credit. Google will give you $300,000 for your startup company. You just have to have seed funding. I'm not sure they'll count $20 from your relatives as seed funding, but I didn't read the standards either. So that's always an interesting option if you're planning on building a game-changing application. So I want you to know I'm actually looking at this stuff. It's not a performative goal. It's actually something that helps me so I can provide feedback and I can get back on things and try to make sure I'm making this the best class I can given the constraints. So while I was doing that, one of the things that I decided to do is, of course, I did some data analytics on it, and I said, I wonder, and since it was cloud-based, I de-anonymized, or I anonymized the data, not de-anonymized. I anonymized the data because all I was caring about was what you said, not who said it. That doesn't make any difference to me. And I wanted to stress this point because I'm going to come back to it over and over again, and that is when you start handing data to anyone in the cloud, in essence, you have created a potential vulnerability. And that made me wonder, well, okay, where did I get the data from? I got it from Canvas. I pulled the data from Canvas, and then I strip everybody's names out, and I just take the comments, and I analyze the comments. Okay, great. How secure is Canvas? And that's what leads to the next slide. New battery, and the remote mouse works great. So now I can go back and torture the people in the back. And so I did a very quick check with Perplexity, who gave me a complete list of CVEs that Canvas has actually experienced with their product. These are things that were data exposures. And this is the reality of the world. And I wanted to use this Canvas data because it's something that you are using, and you may not have actually thought about the fact that your data from Canvas could be compromised. But this is an issue that's going to come up over and over again in our conversations as we continue to expand upon our use of cloud computing. So how many of you at least have identified something to predict? How many of you asked ChatGPT and got some weird suggestion? Because if you give it a fuzzy question like that, it'll give you a fuzzy answer. You know, fuzzier than the leftovers in your refrigerator that you don't want to open up. It's a science experiment. What was the most memorable experience that you had talking to your AI? About the class. I don't need to know anything other than that. You didn't have, nobody had one. Nobody had anything interesting. Nobody said, wow, that's kind of cool. Mm-hmm.
The thinking model was so littered with jargon and symbols that I couldn't even interpret half of what it was telling me.
Interesting. So the thinking model came back and gave you a cerebral answer filled with jargon that made it inaccessible to you.
Yeah.
So I asked at the beginning what you know about networking, or how much you know about networking. People were pretty hesitant about that. Remember, one of the most powerful uses of AI is helping it educate you, giving you the domain knowledge that you need in order to tackle a particular problem. Don't believe everything it tells you any more than you should believe anything I tell you. But it gives you a model, because the way that you learn, the way that all of us learn, even LLMs, is we construct a model, and then we go and we analyze the world, and we compare the world's behavior to what our model says it should be doing. And at that point, we can have, they're in sync. Great, our model seems to be correct. They're not in sync. So either I need to change the model, or I need to insist that the data is flawed, and therefore I will ignore it because it doesn't fit the model. That really is the complete decision tree. Do any of you know people who go to they insist their model is correct and just reject any data that doesn't agree with it approach? Have you ever done that? Insisted that something was true even when it wasn't? And maybe you figured it out later? LLMs do the same thing. The difference is they don't remember, because they start all over. It's Groundhog Day all over again. Great. You know, I didn't even open this up. You can't see you. There. Thank you for sharing that. That's actually an interesting insight. In office hours yesterday, I popped in and used Kimi, mostly because I wanted people to understand that you will get interesting answers from different LLMs. And often you get the most interesting analysis when you start copying and pasting the answers from one into the other and asking them to comment on it. And I think there's a couple of reasons, well, I know there's a couple of reasons for why some of this is happening. One is you're giving it more context to work with. And number two, you're giving it something, and if you tell it came from another LLM, it will not trigger its please the user mode. So it can go into the honesty mode, because frankly, that's the biggest problem with actual original LLMs without all of the alignment on top of them. They're honest, but their honesty is what follows the thing you gave me before. They match patterns. You give them a pattern, they match it. Part of the pattern that they are given that you don't see unless you go looking on the internet and people have cracked them and published them, you don't see the instructions that were given to the model before it saw the first word that you typed. So someone else has already come along and framed it. And I've looked at it. I looked at Codex, which is open source. They were publishing explicitly what the instructions that OpenAI is giving ChatGPT-5 when you ask it a coding question. And it literally says, if the user has given you approvals, blanket approvals, never ask them anything, which is really annoying. I find that if I ask an LLM, so what are our options here? And it goes off and starts writing code, I'm like, what? I wanted to have a conversation first. I wanted to work through the problem. You have to explicitly frame that, because otherwise this implicit instruction is going to tell the LLM to generate something. And from a commercial perspective, I think that makes sense, because the chat interface people have said, we need to be happy and helpful assistants. And a happy, helpful assistant always says, sir, yes, sir. So an old movie at this point is called The Devil Wears Prada. And if you've ever seen that movie, you are Miranda Priestley, at least in the eyes of the LLM. You are the insufferable bitch who has to be satisfied, because It's been told that's what you are. It must satisfy you. Last week, there was an information exposure of almost 600 gigabytes with a, yeah, that's a lot, of data from Geej Networks. Geej Networks is probably the world's foremost provider in governmental control firewalls. I had these very interesting conversations with both Gemini and ChatGPT about this, and they both warned me not to actually download or access that information because it might possibly contain Canadian PII, personally identifiable information, and that the ownership of personally identifiable information that was retrieved in a surreptitious manner is a criminal offense in Canada. And so that led me to keep asking questions and to probe into this a little more deeply, because I said, well, just having something that I mean, you can go download it on the internet. It's 600 gigabytes, so hopefully you have a reasonable amount of storage, but you probably have access to 600 gigabytes today. And I'm like going, I wonder what's in there. Apparently it's documents and code. And it explains in detail how a number of governments around the world implement controls. Now, Geej Networks is based in China. And I was very interested as I started having this conversation with several different models, is they were very Western focused in this. And I said, I don't want this to be a China bashing conversation, because everyone in cloud computing is interested in controlling data. And so today, I'm going to talk about governmental control of data, and on Thursday, I'm going to talk about corporate control of data. I'm going to keep talking about ethics, but the way I'm going to try and frame this is explaining to you the situation, explaining to you some of the nuances of it, not all of them, and leaving it to you to decide what the right ethical behavior is, because I don't want to tell you what it means to be ethical. There's lots and lots of people who want to do that. Many of them are trying to do it via data control. And I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in teaching you critical thinking so that you can make those decisions for yourself. So I'm going to start this off with a question, which I hypothesized that probably wouldn't actually make a lot of sense to the people in the class, and the lack of networking understanding or lack of networking background reinforces that. Who benefits and who is exposed when cloud providers block domain fronting to comply with national laws? Does anyone know what domain fronting is? So the interesting thing that we do in security is that, in networking in general, is that we take a message, and then we put metadata around that message, and then we put metadata around the metadata that's around the message, and we put metadata about metadata around the message, and we just keep adding headers and trailers until we finally have this big multi-layer message. At the very top, we have a message that is directed at a particular IP address. Then buried below that is a service name identifier, typically the actual website name. When you type a website name into a browser, what happens under the covers is that the name itself is taken, sent to a cloud-based service that does name to IP address translation, so name to network translation. IPv4, IPv6 doesn't matter, and just another UBC connection. One of the two people who defined the IPv6 architecture was a UBC graduate. And last I checked, I think he was living in West Van, in a very, very nice place on Marine Drive with a yard and a fence. So that gives you an idea what happens when you are one of the co-inventors of IPv6 and worked for Cisco for many years. I really should have him come in and give a talk. That would be interesting, too. When we start encrypting things, what happens is we have some information inside the encrypted area and some information that's outside the encrypted area. What do we do when those pieces of information are different? See, when they started building this, they didn't think about this particular situation. But what happens is we now have a way of sending a message for a different service here to you, but in fact, you then tear all the pieces apart, and you notice that the internal message is actually routed over to her, right there. And so she's the one that actually responds to the original message. So domain fronting is a part of cloud computing. A content distribution network, you talk about acronyms and whatnot. I was like, as soon as I started putting these together, I'm working with ChatGPT-5, and it's like using these buzzwords. I'm like going, no. I want to make sure that I can use the whole words so that people can actually figure out what I'm talking about. A content distribution network is exactly what I described earlier when I was using the video example, where we push those videos out so they're close to you. The content is the video. But content distribution is not just video, it's everything. When you start looking at Amazon, anybody ever shop on Amazon or Alibaba or Temu or AliExpress actually, right? Or Temu or, Amazon and Temu are pretty much the same thing, right? It's just a difference of whether or not it's cached locally or remote. It's latency you're paying for. Probably never thought of it that way, did you? How many of you have ordered from Temu? Oh, a couple of hands are like, oh yeah, maybe once or twice. Come on. Why wouldn't you order from Temu? It's like a tenth the price of Amazon. How long does it take to get something from Temu? Anybody? Sometimes it doesn't show up at all, right? And then it's so cheap, you're like, it's not worth $3 to go and chase these people because I'd rather do something different. So Amazon's going to charge you $30 for that instead, and it'll be here tomorrow. So you're paying for low latency. So it really does all tie together. And the reason that Amazon is a great example, and Temu, to be honest, and AliExpress as well, is because behind all of them, there's this cloud infrastructure that makes it all possible. Amazon started out selling books. But they decided they needed to have the IT infrastructure to be able to expand and scale this out. And that's why the most profitable thing that Amazon does today is cloud computing. They sell things for themselves and for other people, and they do it really efficiently. And they've also added a physical component to that, which is logistics, the delivery of the actual product. Anybody ever returned anything to Amazon? Have you ever had them tell you just to keep it? It's the same reason that you didn't go after that $3 item from Temu that didn't never show up. It's not worth it. It's too expensive to deal with getting it corrected. So, I one time had a barbecue grill that I ordered from Amazon, and it just disappeared in the middle of the shipping. And I waited 2 weeks, and then they said, we'll send you another one. And then they both showed up. And then I contacted, there's literally no way to return the extra one. It's just not in their business model because the profit margins are just not there to actually handle the returns that way. Amazon doesn't handle the returns. You send that back, it goes to somebody else, a different company that actually salvages it. It's crazy. The only things that actually really do get put back into stock are generally very high-ticket items. So, your Birkin handbag that you bought from Amazon. Does anybody know what a Birkin handbag is? Have you ever seen a Birkin handbag?
I haven't seen one, but my sister, she's a hairdresser, works with really rich clients.
Oh yeah, they all have Birkin handbags. Okay, so there was this case of a guy in New York City who actually was creating NFTs and he's calling them Meta Birkins, and they're basically little images of Birkin bags with different textures applied to them. And he gets sued by Hermes, which is the maker of the Birkin handbag. And I'm like, who do I know that might actually have a Birkin bag? So I asked one of my PhD supervisors, not the one here at UBC, one of my PhD supervisors, I said, do you know anything about Birkin handbags? And she sent me a picture of her daughter holding one. I read the actual legal complaint. It says that year over year, Birkin handbags appreciate in value about 17% per year. Now, of course, the cloud computing angle here is it was an NFT. So you're probably not going to buy your Birkin handbag on Amazon. Mostly because the people who actually get those handbags are usually big customers. And like they wait years to get one. All right, so a content distribution network is designed for performance. It's not really interested in end-to-end security. So here's another fascinating part about CDNs. In order to implement the CDN architecture, the keys for decrypting the SSL packets that are being used to transmit from your web browser or the application that's using HTTPS are held by the CDN itself. So they get decrypted at the edge. That's where we start removing the layers of that package I was talking about before. And now we remove the outer layer, and now we have the inner layer, and inside of it is the address of the actual service we're trying to get to. But this starts to get complicated because in a multi-tenancy situation, in other words, I'm servicing the needs of different customers and different clients in different jurisdictions potentially, whose rules apply here? This gets complicated very quickly. All we care about, when you talk to CloudFront, CloudFront is probably one of the premier providers of content distribution networks. Akamai is another company that does essentially the same thing. You may have never actually heard of, but it's been around for a long time. Accelerating things by pushing them to the edge, very common solution. The cloud providers end up selling this very simple-looking service. Give us your keys and we'll front-end it. I mean, my professional website actually sits behind CloudFront because they'll protect one domain for free. So I'm not paying for it. But it prevents things like distributed denial of service attacks, which are a huge, huge problem. And it prevents classes of attack. So when you go and you look up the IP address for my website, you get an IP address that then points to CloudFront, and CloudFront then filters that out so that people can't send anything other than just HTTP traffic to it. So they can't use SSH attacks, for instance. They can't try to attack the machine itself. I only expose the IPv6 address, which is how I connect to it. So who owns, so the cloud provider is giving us the simple service, so who owns the problem here, the complexity? Who's dealing with this actual complexity? I mean, in theory, it should always be the cloud provider, but the reality is it's actually more complicated than that because at some point you will get involved in that because if you're using this kind of split domain environment, you have to have a facility that will allow it. So here's the interesting observation. This was not an intended effect. They didn't expect to send messages through proxies. Google, Amazon, and Microsoft had all blocked domain fronting by 2018. So a long time ago, you were still little kids. The rationale for this was a commercial one, and that's why Thursday is about commercial control information. This violates our terms of service. But in fact, underneath that was a political decision, which was we don't want people to masquerade with one name when they're answering questions for a different name. Because in essence, that's what a VPN does. When you use a virtual private network, what's happening is we're encapsulating messages, sending them somewhere, that somewhere is then sending them out as if it came from that machine. Except this is the other way, which is I'm sending a message, and the message I'm sending it to ends up getting encapsulated, sent to that intermediate proxy, and then that intermediate proxy sends it onwards. ngrok is a service that I use. It's kind of like that. I wanted to collect data about myself from my own Google account and my own Microsoft Graph is the API OneDrive account because I was doing storage research. And they use webhooks. But a webhook is a public-facing front end. So I found a service, there's a bunch of them, I found a service called ngrok. And what ngrok does, it's just a packet forwarding service, basically. So I tell Google, yeah, send it over here. It goes over there, ngrok takes that, and then it sends it to me. It means that my machine, which is behind my firewall, which is safe and protected, gets those messages but doesn't have to deal with any of the other potential surface area for attack. But what's interesting about this is it's the opposite of what governments that want to control the outcome dictate. So in other words, if you go to google.com on some networks, what will happen is it won't go to google.com. It won't go to a service that even belongs to Alphabet or Google. It will go to a service that belongs to someone else. Domain fronting. So from the perspectives of different actors in this space, we end up with different strengths and weaknesses. And in the end, this is the way that we get into an ethical conversation about this. The ethics of this involve what are your goals and objectives? And since these are corporate goals and objectives, personal goals and objectives, social goals and objectives, there are different perspectives on these things. And in your own work, you need to consider that. You need to think about that. So what's the right framework? You think about who's benefiting from this and who's paying the price. Western companies implement this very simple policy of the domain inside and outside the packet has to match. So in the HTTP header has to match the service it was sent to in the first place. This became an interesting issue when Russia started putting a lot of pressure on Google and Amazon because Telegram was using domain fronting. So Russia didn't want dissidents in the country to actually use domain fronting to bypass Russian controls over messaging. And Google and Amazon and Microsoft all agreed. and they decided that was against their terms of service. Oddly enough, as I was researching through this stuff, it turns out that Yandex, which is Russian, is the preferred way of people doing Telegram gateways these days, because Yandex is less compliant than Google and Amazon and Microsoft, and that seemed a little surprising. So I didn't research to verify it, but I thought it was an interesting observation. Companies where social order is more important have the opposite problem, which is domestic governmental requirements are they have to be able to see that traffic. So you can't actually have end-to-end encrypted traffic. You can send it just like, well, it's with a CDN, you send it to the CDN. But if the CDN now belongs to a governmental agency or any agency that wants to actively control or monitor what you are sending, they will have the keys. They will decrypt the packet. They will do the deep packet inspection. That we're literally, deep packet inspection just means we keep digging through the envelope wrappers until we find the underlying message, so we can figure out what the actual underlying message is. Alibaba solved this by building a dual stack. There's a stack that they use in China, and there's a stack they use outside China. Huawei has actually expanded globally. This is really interesting, because one of the questions I asked was, well, what do they do in Latin America? And it turns out that Latin America doesn't have an Amazon or a Huawei or a Tencent or an Alibaba. And because of that vacuum, these companies all have presence there and trying to gain control. They have different models of that control. And it doesn't matter, because in the end, all of them will comply with national laws. But the national laws vary. So when we come to some cloud perspective, we have shared responsibility. The users, cloud providers, and content providers all have different competing interests, and we have to weigh measures. So think about who's responsible for controlling censorship. How many of you are from Canada? We don't have censorship in Canada, right? Except that when I started talking about downloading these networks data dump, I got warning from multiple LLMs saying, well, that could be an act that would put you in prison, because it might have data. I'm like, might have? If I pick up something like a USB stick off the ground while I'm walking around USB, and I open a stick on my computer for a second, I could be criminally liable for the contents? Okay, this is free speech. How? Many of these conversations become complicated because they become contextually dependent. I found the USB stick. Right. I've never acted on this. Okay, I have actually worked on a case that involved potential child pornography. I was looking at metadata. I wasn't looking at pictures. I was looking at metadata pictures and analyzing pictures themselves, because there were some dubious things about the metadata of the pictures. It's just that they might actually be modified. It was a very strange case. It was a case in the United States, and the person was charged with human trafficking. And apparently one of the humans that he trafficked might have been underage at some point when one of the photos was taken, and that's what we're trying to determine. They ended up not using me further because I realized that it was a non-malicious explanation for some of the metadata they saw there, because it ties into the way the cameras record information in storage. I mean, you delete pictures, it reuses the storage, but it doesn't necessarily zero out metadata. So if you have metadata that looks like pictures and deleted, it's going to do something different. These are complicated. Have anyone ever seen a porn information on the internet? No! Wow, this is really awesome. Great. Well, you guys have never seen anything like this. I think it's turned bad because of right? How much of that forms in the cloud? How much is it? Seriously, I mean, it's like, what? You're going to find your old relatives in your porn collection? No, it's all in it. Essentially, it's all there. It's all, I remember years ago, I got a sort of interesting quotes here. Years ago, I was teaching a class at Data General, and they were based in North Carolina. And they had a specific section of their facility there that was, you were warned before you entered that section that was the support team for the porn distributors, because these folks were building rack mount servers. And those rack mount servers were being used to distribute pornographic images. And the people who worked on that, they had read it and other than they had a problem, they were looking for. They weren't looking at porn. The interesting story was when I had a guy from Microsoft in my class who said that he actually ran a Microsoft porn server. He had written, I didn't see it, he had a written exemption from Microsoft's policy of no pornography on the network. He had the content filtering team. It's kind of hard to build a content filtering product if you didn't have any content to filter. Yeah, right, very interesting. So it's interesting to see, and realize how what's happening. But then it's even worse, because I was talking to him at Salesforce at lunch shortly, and he was talking about how they have teams that actually watch for deeply disturbing images that people try to put online. This is such a stressful job. It's generally outsourced to their work countries where they can use people for small amounts of money. It's such a stressful job that most people work on it only do a couple of months, because literally the things that they are asked to do over and over and over again are just absolutely horrible. So that's the flip side of this. We need these kinds of controls. We need to have social structure and understanding, because if we don't manage that, then we allow things that are just non-acceptable socially. I mean, I'm having a hard time with words to actually say how socially acceptable it is. I mean, it's stuff I work on pre-game comparison, but it's 17 18. I don't know. I know pictures I've been really into. I hope metadata. So that's why I think that most people would agree that level of censorship is perfectly acceptable. Okay, so we're not allowed that kind of censorship. But what about censorship that teaches us things that you deem socially unacceptable? Who's making those decisions? You need to be involved in that. You can't just use technology who says, I'm just doing it for money. Actually, if you want to get technology, you say, I don't care, I'm going to buy it, I'm just doing it for money. That's a decision, but I want to be cautious decision about it as well. Does every region of the world need some cloud computing for data control? Is it possible to provide neutrality, or is ownership requirement? I don't actually answer this question. This is a question I'm going to challenge you with to think about, to say, should we go do that? Maybe I'll ask somebody, or ask a couple people to defend each position next time on Thursday, because then we'll talk about corporate control as well. And we can actually compare corporate control. So some data control examples. I could use more acronyms here. Data glossary in terms of these terms. IP, Internet Protocol, ASN, autonomous system number. So each entry point into the internet, each exit point on the internet has an assigned ASN number. It's used for routing packets to the right places. So you generally IP address. Border data protocol BGP is how we keep track of where messages should be sent, because that's dynamically changed. This is a very interesting key area, because more than once, BGP routing messages have been sent out that reroute traffic through other countries. Generally doesn't last very long, but it's probably kind of probing, where you need to try things out and see what you can do. Because I was thinking about this in the background here, you realize that control of data, control of information is in fact a huge vehicle for political control and military control. We were talking about that much, but how many of you know the AI being used with drones to engage in war between two countries in Europe? Have you heard about war in Europe? From a technology perspective, they're picking LLMs and they're using them to control drones that drop explosives on people, that identify the specific location of people so that artillery can be routed and directed at them. That's not doing. How do you perfectly Project 1? My prediction protocol is, given the information available about the size of troops and deployment and their location, classroom location, what likelihood is I'm actually able to kill them with a, or whatever. You're missile. See, things are really expensive. One kill them with a pebble. You can't kill someone with a pebble, or maybe stone. A slingshot is actually a very effective weapon. So I wonder if I'm doing a slingshot. Probably. Domain system tampering. So domain system is how you take a www name and turn it into an IP address. HTTP keyword filtering. Active programming. Active programming. Packaging in front of all of these things become mechanisms for controlling the flow of data. Perfectly legitimate use for these things. We throttle your stream because the internet suggests it. There's nothing suspicious about that. We also use it to throttle your stream because we know this is how you're getting your command and control information from point A to point B. And look what happened in that war we're talking about when Starlink cut off access for a short period of time. It had profound impact. How many of you have actually heard of HTTP 3? What is it? Oh no, I heard it. Okay, that's good. So traditionally HTTP 1 and HTTP 2 is on top of the control protocol, which is a stateful protocol. TCP is on top of UDP. I'm sorry, TCP is on top of IP. So it's a layer separate. So the internet protocol, transfer protocol, we have HTTP protocol on top of that, and actually the TLS protocol, and move the HTTP protocol there, and then we put things inside the HTTP messages as follows. Like I said, it's just packages putting bigger names around it. HTTP 3 is a radically different approach to the problem. We no longer use a stateful protocol. We no longer use TCP. We don't use a stateful protocol level. Instead, what we do is we use what's called user data protocol, UDP. And TCP and UDP are considered to be the same level. UDP doesn't offer any kinds of reliability guarantees. It says, yeah, hey, I got a message for you, and all it adds is a port. So IP gives you that address, then layer gives you a port address. Now TCP also gives a connection state, so it has connection identifier, and it has connection protocol. UDP, sorry, it's sending postcards. Okay, it's not postcards. Initially, they probably in the right order, probably in the lost, but it doesn't matter because in the layers above, what are called for covering for that kind of issues. This is not hard protocol to filter. Because it's no longer that state. It changes the whole stack, and suddenly the entire infrastructure we built doesn't work anymore. So this is interesting from that perspective, is that technical changes are done to improve performance and have impact far beyond those technical changes. And I mentioned things like critical flow, which is how we do end-to-end handshaking, so we know we're talking to, really think we're talking to. Because remember, we have our messages with more messages, more hoppers. And if I'm trying to have a conversation with you, I can encrypt the message and start my error, but in a similar way, and actually goes for him, and he sends it over to her, and she sends it to you. But you get it, and they can't see what's inside of that encrypted, only you can. So that's why we use that encryption layer. Then we're looking for anomaly. Anomaly detection is something we'll talk about more, because in fact, part of the motivation for Project 1 is later when we start talking about anomaly detection. Anomaly detection is a huge thing. Has anybody ever had a cockpit compromise? Like, use enough, if you get compromised. The credit card companies will identify very quickly the occurrence of compromise because it costs them money. And so they have what's called anomaly detection. They actually see when you do something that doesn't fit your normal pattern. There are parameters for all these things. So you can run DNS register channels, HTTPS, TLS. You can run the encrypted echo, encrypted service name identifier. Tor is a very interesting sample. Have you ever heard Tor? It's obviously on the dark web, right? And it's always in the movies. Maybe Tor browser and whatnot. This is actually built by part of the Navy. Believe it or not. And it's probably one of the open source projects now. It's probably one of the more reliable ways. It's very slow because all those layers and all the application has costs associated with it. It's probably the most effective way to bypass these kinds of emission controls. I'm not going to go into great detail because we're running short of time, but wanted to make sure that you had a reasonable frame for the fact that this is a more complicated question than you might originally envision. The challenge for you now, you're here, we're talking about how to use cloud, we're talking about cloud computing. You are the architects who will define what cloud does over the next 4 years. And so I want you to be thinking about what matters, what's important here. We are trying to balance competing interests and competing rights. When you share information on the website, when you move it now, you should pretty much assume that at some point it's going to show up in the most embarrassing place it could possibly show up. On the front page of something that you're trying to read. It'll change this training, that will change the way you start thinking about privacy and security and information. I'm going to, there's women here, so they actually understand this problem more than probably will. There's something called Flow Health in the United States that created an app for measuring mental status. So they can tell them they're operating and keep track things that way. And you see 8 kinds of potential issues with an app like this. Imagine you live in a country, which you here in Canada. Imagine you live in a country where abortion previously had been legal, became illegal. They're used. You might find the point right now. Right, the problem is the data doesn't actually tell what actually happened. It gives you something, but now you have very sensitive personal identifiable information. I think anybody here is steering code, maybe you were kind of on that cusp. One of the things you use for vaccination records, and then vaccination records, this third-party company, I went to the third-party company, they have no one anywhere in the infrastructure, they need the IDs, have it, doctors. I refused. They gave me a lecture about it, but I refused. I said, I'm not going to do this again, because it's already leaked my personal health data once before. I got $40 for that one. You know, most of the class actions you didn't have to do anything for, never result in none of it. I don't trust them. It's not because these people are malicious, it's because they don't even know there's an issue. And that's what I want to make sure none of you walk out there saying, this data, it's all safe, put in the cloud. No, it's not. So, she insisted, you should not concur. I make sure that I tell you that you should not download these networks data. I'm like, hey, I told you. Do not download this prohibited, forbidden content and do not put it on your computer. And if you do so, make sure you do not put it in a place where anyone can actually find it. That whole encryption thing, it also works for you. Because you did something that, I don't know, I lost the key for that. It's next to the 600 bitcoins that I stored on a cold wallet, and I don't have the key to anymore. Right? If you find that bitcoin, this 600 bitcoin cold wallet key, that was the key for the data too. So go find it, guys. Because I asked the question, I said, do you think this CSS has already downloaded this package? It's like there's a 0 chance that as soon as someone sees this, they didn't join it down. So the rules for you are different than the rules for someone else. Who can handle leak data? This is what I'm going to end up. The global actually the one who kicked off the story, believe it or not. So it is a very big story. They're the ones who actually wrote about this huge deal. 600 gigabytes is a lot. So we have government, we have media, we have academics. I mean, the security guards, and we have legitimate use for this data, because this is pro. It's going to give one research insight, so probably thousands of research instructions. Because people look at different versions. But each of these have different legal standards that apply to them. So if you're a state actor of CSIS, then your primary national security, your question is a threat, because we're not subject to that. We're not subject to that kind of criminal prosecution around this data. Global mail data is interesting, they probably protected as well, because that falls into the speech kind of rules. Academics, I don't know, I'm going to use legal review and say, hey, it's okay, I'm going to use data about how Myanmar's government firewall works. And here's other people from the rules different. You have enough money to hire really good lawyers. You know how rich people avoid paying taxes? They hire very smart lawyers and pay them more than the government pays government lawyers. And they find ways to make the story so complicated that the government can't come after someone. Because this isn't a physical crime, it's not a violent crime, this is an information crime. And you hide that. So if you want to play in this space, very charts. What matters to you? Lots of times usual. Technical side of things is not a complete picture. Getting your 8 work right is just the first step. Now you have to think about how to secure that idea. What are potential exposures of the data that I'm collecting? The difference between someone who is a professional and someone who's a patient is because they're able to do that. A professional learning one understands that there is a much more complication behind this, at least is aware. I mean, the business people come to you at work and they say, we want to add this feature, which I'm sure is on the flow. We want to add this feature, but they have to say, don't just say money. You want to be cognizant of what that means. When I'm starting data to an outside service so they can give me some analytics on it, how am I paying for that? What is commodity that I'm trading here? Because it's not cash at this point. What is it? I mean, it's regardless, you're all the way out. You're just thinking about lunch. It's the data. I'm curious, how many of you using successful models are rolling this up to? I see almost responsible. I'm not sure, clearly. If you're perfect with your knowledge, that's great too. I started finding this in the last year, so that's why I was curious. I don't teach right now. I don't care whether decisions are something mindful decisions. Something you is what you think, what you think is in the best interest of people you're representing. All right, that's it. See you on Thursday when we talk about corporate data control. Is this last year something? two people say so. But, okay. I'm not sure if it's just in the class now, or if it's the, yeah, right, let's watch the YouTube video. Let me stop the streaming and stop recording. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. That'd be great. Right, it'd be great. And there are actually